Hey, peace and blessings to you. My name is Jerry B. I am the entree musician, and so are you. And so is this gentleman sitting on the other side of the screen. Let me tell you something. The greatest producer in the history of smooth jazz,
Oh
hands
man.
down, two-time Grammy Award winner, 75 number one contemporary jazz radio hits, 12 albums, 30 plus years in the business, working with people like God bless him, Luther Vandross, George Benson, Boney James, Patty Austin, and many, many, plenty more. I could go on, but I won't. This is the Mr. Paul Brown. Blessings to you, brother.
Nice to see you.
All right. I love that intro. Absolutely fantastic, man. It's so great to finally have an opportunity to sit with you here on the Entree Musician. When we talk about being entrepreneurial and musicians, you've got the formula hands down, brother. What has been your secret, man?
Boy, I don't know. I've just been very fortunate and been able to work with some of my idols and heroes in the music business, like Jarreau and Larry Carlton, and it's just been a pretty amazing ride for me, and I'm very thankful.
Absolutely. Well, let's back up a few sketches. What got you into music in the first place? Did you come from a musical family, or when did you know that you knew?
Well, yeah, my parents were both singers, and grew up in L.A. and pretty much went with them to the studio all the time, doing either movies or television shows or what have you, because there was only a handful of background singers at the time in Los Angeles that read music
Hmm.
and knew blend and everything. And my mom's a very famous background singer. Everybody knows her voice. She did, Rise Cerrone, San Francisco Treat for 50 years. That was her
Wow.
voice. And my parents, they met in the Meltones, and so they sang with Mel Torme for years. And anyway, they did, Flintstones, Meet the Flintstones. That's the two of them.
Wow.
Batman, and things that you don't think about with background vocals, but then they sang with Ray Charles and Frank Sinatra and Elvis and Barbara Streisand, and it's just been on and on and on. So they're both gone now, but they lived until mid 90s, both of them,
Wow.
and they worked up until they were over 90 and
Mm.
kept going. So I figure I'm pretty much on the same path. I started super early as a drummer,
Mhm.
and then played in bands and was constantly writing music and playing guitar, and just sort of well, I never thought I would really do anything except play drums. And
Mm.
then I got married at age 23, and I was just an average drummer at the time, and I played guitar as well. But my brother-in-law at the time was head engineer at Warner Brothers, and he called me and he said, "Hey man, how are you going to support your wife?" And I said, "Well, drumming as usual." He goes, "Well, I want you to start working for me." So the next Monday, I literally started working for Warner Brother Records as an engineer,
Mm.
assistant engineer for
Yeah.
Lee Berg and Al Schmidt and some of the great engineers. And so over that 15-year period of doing that, I shifted away from drumming and became more of a studio guy, witnessing production on many, many records, like Van Halen and to Christopher Cross and Randy Newman and James Taylor, Ricky Lee Jones, etc., Frank Sinatra.
Wow.
And and during those years, really learned how to craft records, and then started really bringing my bands in on the weekends and producing, and one thing kind of led to another, and just started mixing for a living. And what they called remixes back then, you can make a lot of money just taking a song and remixing it. One of the first gold records I ever had was Paula Abdul, Straight Up,
Mm.
and that was a remix.
Right.
And I did that, and I also did One Step Forward, Two Steps Back for her, a remix. And I did um, anyway, a bunch of that was what was happening then. They did these 12 inches for clubs and remixes for radio. So I got kind of heavily into that. And it was taking a track that was basically already great and just kind of, you know, manipulating a little bit, new drums, new bass ideas, sometimes new changes, but keeping the original vocals, which were already great, and sort of a new radio type song out of it. And so, and I really didn't do any jazz per se. My parents were both really jazz musicians, but I started working with Luther Vandross and recording his vocals mostly, and watching him produce as well, him and Marcus Miller, and that sort of led into wanting to do my own records eventually. But what happened was I was doing Luther and this group called Shy. I don't know if you remember them.
Yeah, I do.
You know, song, and if I ever introduced them, and that was kind of what I was doing. And then Bobby Caldwell, I was hired to mix his record, Stuck on You.
Oh, wow.
And that was around 89 or 90, something like that. And so during that process, his manager asked me, do you want to go to Japan for 2 months and mix Bobby's live sound and do some recording? I wasn't playing with Bobby, I was just mixing. I said, well, I don't really do that, but it sounds like it would be interesting. So I agreed to do it. And then the first day of rehearsal with Bobby Caldwell, a young saxophonist, Jim Oppenheim, was playing with Bobby. And he knew that I worked with Luther, and we started talking and everything else. And Jim Oppenheim later became Boney James. But, you know, he wanted me to produce his record. And I told him I really haven't done, you know, jazz or, you know, whatever you want to call it at the time. And well, he said, well, you know, I really want you to produce my record. I said, well, if you change your name and, you know, we do basically a Luther record with saxophone, I'd be into doing that. So that's what we did. And that sound of his first record, Trust, kind of became like this new urban sound that really wasn't prevalent in 1990. Back in 1990, you had like Spyro Gyro, Kenny G, David Bourne, Grover, but there really wasn't anybody doing that urban thing. So when we started doing it, and it really caught on, and for some reason radio just embraced it, and his record went platinum, which was really unusual for a new saxophone. So then we did a couple more, and we did them all on Warner Brothers. I did 9 records for Boney on Warner Brothers Records, and they all did amazingly well. So I started getting calls, hey, you know, what's going on there? Why is this, you know, like most people, like even Rick Braun at the time was selling maybe 20, 30,000 records. This kid's selling 1 million records? Wow. So I said, well, you know, the kid's super talented, and we're just trying to do, like I said, like an R&B instrumental. And so everybody just started hiring me to do basically that. And so I shifted away from, you know, R&B engineering and producing into producing what's now called smooth jazz. Back then it was called new adult contemporary, or just instrumental, you know, R&B music is what I thought it was, you know. And I remember the first couple times I worked with Peter White, and we did Walk On By. I put him and Boney together and did Walk On By, and it had a big 808 kick, like that. And I remember the radio promoter calling me and saying, hey, can you get rid of that big kick, because that's not going to work for smooth jazz. Well, I think we were trying to do something, you know, not typical of smooth jazz. So let's just see what happens. And sure enough, went to #1. And there's been a lot of examples of that where we stuck to our guns and just said, hey, and it's really become sort of the norm now. And 30 years later, I still hear people doing that exact same thing, trying to do what we did 30 years ago, and not as good, I don't think. You know, they're kind of copying what we did.
Sure.
But you know, it's a format that works for instrumental, you know, musicians, and so it gave Boney an incredible career, and he's just killing it now. And then I started working with Rick Braun and Peter White, and you know, Larry Carlton and Bob James and Kirk Whalum, and you know, then I got hired. as a producer for Warner Brothers, an exclusive producer. So I could sign artists, and we built a huge roster with Norman Brown and Jonathan Butler and, you know, Mark Antoine and Pat Metheny, and on and on and on. And so it was an amazing time. You know, it was from about 95 up until about 2005. And it was incredible. So basically, you know, my career changed at that point. And then in '04, after doing, I don't know, probably 100 CDs producing wise, I decided, well, I didn't decide. I was doing a demo of this song. You know, 24/7. And I played it back and I was like, wow, that's the first time I've ever thought I sounded like an artist. And it sounded like a finished record. But I was just writing it for Kirk or Boney or whatever. So I played it for some people and they said, hey, it's great. You know, who is it? I said, well, it's me. And they said, well, do some more. So I did a few more, and that became my first record up front. And so that was '04. Now I have 13 CDs, solo CDs. And so that's kind of been the progression.
That's an excellent journey that you've taken us on. My goodness gracious. And I could say this is the first time that I've heard that you were a drummer. That's your foundational instrument. But in listening to your music, you know, it makes perfect sense.
You know, a lot of producers are, you know, recovering drummers, as they say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the rhythm, you know, I mean, it's funny because my dad was a crazy harmonic, you know, genius, and his stuff is always approached from a harmonic sense, you know, but my stuff's always approached from a rhythmic sense.
Gotcha.
And there's a big difference there. And like for me, if the rhythm doesn't catch me, I have a hard time listening to the other stuff. I don't care how amazing it is harmonically. If it doesn't work for me rhythmically, it doesn't work for me, you know. And I have another friend, Jerry Hay, who's an amazing horn arranger, and he's very harmonic oriented. And so there's like different ways of hearing music, but I think it's helpful, you know, obviously to have a good sense of all of it. But for me, it definitely starts there, you know.
Yeah.
Like cavemen, I think. You know, log drums. I don't know what it is.
No, that heartbeat of the music, that's absolutely fantastic. May I ask, and please, you don't have to mention any names, obviously working with the cream of the crop. Has there been any production or producer session which has been very challenging for you, and why? We can leave the artist out of it, but something that you said, you know, this is something either that I'm learning or that I'm challenged by, or I'd rather not do again.
Not really. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I do a lot of things like arranging, you know, writing, mixing, producing, playing, and then performing. I do a lot of different things. I do enjoy them all, but I think the thing I enjoy most is being in the studio with band, because you can like make subtle changes and move stuff around that makes a huge difference to the end product. And you can try things on the spot and say, you know what, let's, you know, I know we're not supposed to speed up, but let's speed up in the chorus, you know, and then let me program the click if we have a click, so that in the chorus it comes up a click or two. Or, you know, let's lose the click because it just doesn't feel right. Okay, I don't care if it shifts around, I want it to feel right. Music by numbers, you know, it has its advantages for editing and so on, but in the long run, I think you lose a lot. People get so into it, you know, and then with Pro Tools, there's so much you can do that in the old days with 24 track you just could not do. And in a lot of ways, I think it's ruined music. And in a lot of ways, I think it's made people do things that they shouldn't be doing, you know, and fixing things that shouldn't be fixed. And I'm a huge fan of stuff that's on a grid, you know, because like I said, it sounds like a drum machine, not a drummer. I mean, hire the right cat who has the right feel, and then you get that, why would you want to change that into something that's not his normal, feel? Of course, there's times when it just doesn't work and you have to fix it, and it's nice to have a grid for that. But I prefer doing it the old-fashioned way, I think, and being in the studio, you can do that. I said, you know what, the bridge doesn't sound great coming right there. Let's extend this a couple of measures, or add a bar to just let it rest, and then go into something else, or try different things, or modulate if you need to, or don't modulate.
Right.
And so it's really interesting, because if you sit around like most people do with a sequencer, and come up with the arrangement, it's like, okay, A, B, C, pre-chorus, lip, blah blah, and it's all good, but I don't know. I can have a 2-chord jam, like some of the early Boney stuff. It's like 2 chords, and it comes down to like drops in the drums and the bass, and keeping it interesting, and then adding some orchestration in different sections to make the sections come out more. But basically, it's the same 2 chords, even 1 chord,
Right.
with a cool beat,
Right.
and an interesting melody. And the melody can be really a great way to take you on this journey through this thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be super, involved harmonically or chordally.
Right.
So, I mean, right now, when I first did my first record as a guitarist, it was really more about the production, and I wasn't playing, anything new or anything, but I had the idea of doing a classic sounding guitar sound, like a George Benson or a Wes Montgomery, like jazz box sounding guitar, but with a super urban track behind it.
Right. Right.
That was kind of like my concept for what I was going to try and do.
Yeah.
And so that's what I keep doing. But as I've evolved on these 13 CDs, my guitar playing has come a long, long way. So now it's not more about, but at least equal, shoulder to shoulder with production and playing. So there's definitely a discernible difference in the guitar playing on my later albums, for sure. I mean, my first album, I love it, but it's really more about production. It could be, a number of different people playing, and I had a lot more guests in the old days. And now I'm just kind of carrying the load myself more.
That's very cool. Has there been anything that surprised you in your journey, in the sense that, oh, this was a date that we scheduled, but it went to #1, and I wasn't really thinking that this was going to be the one, but it just kind of hit you? Like you were talking about the Boney James early on with the million sales, but
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, even that song 24/7, I think I had 12 songs on the record. I think it was like #9. I didn't think that was a single at all. I had other songs I thought were singles, but the radio promoter at the time loved that song, and that was his first pick of the label, and it did amazing. And other times, like I did a song with George Benson, "Softly as in the Morning Sunrise," super jazzy. But I did have like an urban track underneath it. It was kind of semi bossa nova, but I was 808 drums and some really interesting harmonics played on keys. And George just absolutely destroyed the song. It was so great. Well, I thought, this is way too sophisticated to be a hit at smooth jazz. I mean, that thing, he's playing some real jazz on that thing.
Exactly.
And then the chords are just amazing,
Yeah.
So I was shocked that it went to #1, but I was very happy. But it just shows you that, you just never know with something like that, an old song. Actually, people didn't really know. But
Because of the programming, yeah.
I mean, it's an old song and people didn't know it. Because originally, I think Benny Goodman, it was like, dee da da dee dum ba da, like that. And so we did, it was way more sexy and cool.
Yeah.
So it made a huge difference, but I don't think a lot of people knew that song.
Well,
did you know that song before that?
Well, I knew it was a classic and a standard, but I did not know where I didn't take it back to Benny Goodman.
Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. I played it for my mom, and she's like, started singing the words. I didn't even know there were words to it. Softly in the summer, like that.
Wow.
So I was
That,
like, hey, okay, it's an old song, but it was a really cool. A friend of mine, Tommy Kay, is an amazing jazz guitar player, had the idea for that
mm,
bossa nova flavor on that,
wow.
and he played the original demo guitar when I put the track together because I thought I was going to do it for him, not for George Benson. It
Ah,
was kind of sitting around, and when they did that record that George did, and it was a real urban vocal record. And the record company called me and said, well, we're not in love with this record. We want a couple of instrumentals on here. Do you have anything? So I said, well, I wrote one song for him called Arizona Sunrise for that particular thing, but I also had this thing lying around and I sent it to him and they said, yeah, this is great. And George is like, oh, I love this song. So we ended up doing it, but
mhm.
it's weird how sometimes things come together. There was only two instrumentals on the album, and they both were singles.
Jiminy. That,
Yeah.
that's absolutely amazing. Well, let's just go back in time just for a second because you mentioned Al Schmidt. I can't let you get away with that because, I'm a liner note reader and just, as a, uh, guy who's involved at my level. And the Al Schmidt records were so incredibly warm. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
what did you learn? It's like butter. What did you
I,
learn? What did you take away from his sessions?
well, like I said, Lee Hirschberg, he was my brother-in-law, and he did all the early Sinatra stuff. And
Mm,
him and Al are the same age, and they were contemporaries and knew each other very well. But when I started seconding, it was Lee. Lee was the head engineer of Warner Brothers. It was Warner Brothers Studios that they worked at, and
mhm.
Al would come in with different projects, like the first Yellow Jackets record.
Right,
I was
right.
in that, and he did George Benson and lots of other stuff at Amigo Studios, Warner Brothers Studios. So I would, second for Al all the time, and then later I would hire Al to do mixes for me when I started producing, like on Mashkinada by Mark Antoine.
Hmm.
I had Patty Austin do the background vocals, and I had
Right.
Jerry A. Horns, and it was an incredible record that I recorded at Capitol. I had Al Schmidt mix it. So I, had an evolution with Al where I was his assistant, and then I was hiring him to do mixes for me, which was great.
Oh my God.
And I got a pretty cool story. I had produced Al Jarreau album, and Al Schmidt and Tommy LiPuma did his first record, We Got By. I don't know if you remember that, but I love that
Yeah,
record.
we got by. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
anyway, I wanted to do a surround mix, so I hired Al Schmidt. So we're sitting at Capitol Records, and Al's on the mixing board, and we're mixing a song, and I'm sitting back by the effects, and I'm just listening. And Al Jarreau is on my left, over in the corner on the phone with his wife, right?
Mhm.
So Al's listening, and he stops, rewinds, and Jarreau says, "Hey Al, my wife says it's too fast." So Al's like, "Really?" So he picks up the phone, dials, goes, hold on a second, hits play, holds the phone up to the thing, he stops, he goes, yeah? Okay, cool. He goes, my wife says it's fine. That put an end to that.
Amazing.
But what he,
Great story.
him and Lee both, it was all about levels and just balances. It wasn't
Mhm.
like he was hyping stuff up or not hyping stuff up. The one thing that I learned from him and Lee is that some things in the track are bright and some things are not bright,
Mhm.
and things that are bright need to be bright, but a lot of mixers brighten up everything so that
Gotcha.
everything is kind of bright, and it's too bright for me, and it doesn't have that, like you said, butter sound.
Yeah,
Like, the bass doesn't need to have high end on it,
yeah,
and the music really lives in the mid range. And
yeah.
like, I mean, Lee used to master all my stuff for me.
Hmm.
He's
Hmm.
an engineer as well, and he always told me, he says, your spectrum, your audio spectrum is too big.
Mm.
Because you got stuff down at 50 cycles, you got stuff up at 20K. You just don't need that. It's in the mids is where everything lives, you know.
Gotcha.
And you can turn it down, you can turn it up, you can listen on one speaker, whatever. It always sounds great if you're in that mid section, and that's what the
Yeah.
song is.
My God.
So I still love a huge, wide, you know, spectrum. But back then, you know, when you were mastering, there weren't CDs back then. It was on records, and if
Correct.
you tremendous bottom end, it would skip. The needle would skip.
Truth.
But with CDs, you don't have to worry about that. So you can pretty much do anything you want. Although vinyl's on its way back up, it's past CDs now for sales, thankfully.
Sure. Sure.
But so there were those things to think about back then. Plus tape, you know, with crosstalk and everything, you couldn't have tremendous amount of volume on certain things. Right now, it's just people, you know, they take a lot for granted. With Pro Tools, they could have something like barely moving, you know, like minus 100. You know, they could have the triangle up at plus 10. I mean, it just doesn't matter anymore, you know. But it doesn't sound great to my ears. But
Sure.
like, what's his face? George Massenburg said, he goes, Pro Tools do everything except sound good.
Wow.
Got a point.
His Earth, Wind, and Fire records, you can forget about them. Dear Father. It's like, what is that?
I'll tell you one to listen to is Ricky Lee Jones' first record, you know, Chucky's in Love and all that. Just put that record on and listen to it. Because we did that. Lee Hirschberg recorded and mixed. And it sounds like, you know, we're sitting in the control room with the glass and the musicians are there. It sounds like the glass has been removed and they're just right here with you. Wow. And it's not hyped up at all, but it's super, you know, it's the way instruments are supposed to sound. And that was what was great about Al and Lee. You know, the fundamental frequencies of each instrument were brought out and not enhanced in a way that's not natural.
Correct.
And everything just like, you know, it pleases your ear because, you know, the piano isn't too bright. The vocal's bright, but it's not sibilant. And all those things. The way, you know, the way a sibilant vocal hits reverb, for instance, is a completely different thing than when you take the sibilants off and then it hits the reverb. It's much smoother because the S is in the reverb and it's really weird, you know. And these guys have different techniques for doing for reverb, which is just, and I learned how to do it too. But they take 3 plates, you know, like real plates up in the room, and they'll do one send will go to one plate and it'll return just on the left.
Yeah.
And then one plate returns just on the right. And then they'll send the one in the middle down both sides, right? So you have a way, if you say you have a guitar that's on the left side, you just want reverb just on the left side. So you that one. Or if you want it to splay across the spectrum, you put the one on the right. Or you can have a balance of each, you know? And then the one in the middle, they'll put through a tape machine running at 7.5 to get pre-delay. So you get an analog tape pre-delay going to the reverb. And it's just beautiful the way it makes it sound, you know? And so all those things is why those records, that's real stereo. Like the piano's on the right and the reverb of the piano's on the right, okay? It's not piano left, right, and reverb left, right, which puts this big haze across your whole mix. So now when you all the, you know, the congas left, right, you know, the strings left, right, no.
That's
the cellos here, the violins are here, pianos over here, the congas are over here, you know.
Positioning.
It's real stereo.
Absolutely.
Coming out of both speakers.
My goodness. Now here's a challenging question for you, Paul. Do you have a favorite album or record that just stands above? You've worked with all of these people, but you've also grown up in the business. But do you have one album or CD that you pull out and go, this is it?
One of my favorites is Peter Gabriel's So. You know, that, you know, Daniel Lanois produced, and I'm a huge Daniel Lanois fan in production. And it's just incredible. I mean, you know, from Red Rain to, you know, Sledgehammer and all this, just like And I love Manu Katché as a drummer. He's one of my
Mm.
and the sound of that record is just mind blowing.
Now that
So
was a Warner Brothers record too, wasn't it? Peter Gabriel, was that a Warner's record?
I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
Okay.
Could be.
Okay. That was during my MTV days, so I remember
Yeah, yeah.
Sledgehammer and
Those
whatnot.
videos were amazing. Peter
Abs-
Gabriel really started that whole animation, part animation.
right.
He's
And you know the history of Warner Brothers. You know Warner Brothers started right here in Youngstown, Ohio.
all
You were
right.
aware of that.
No, I wasn't.
The
Wow.
Warner Theater downtown, and then
Okay.
they went out to
Why?
California.
Is that where we're playing this gig?
Well, no, we're playing at the Youngstown Playhouse. That will be June 28th, but you'll be at the Youngstown Playhouse, which is about maybe 3 miles up from downtown. But you know, depending
Uh,
on when you get in town, either Sharon or I can take you down there and you can see the
yeah,
property.
I would like to see that. Is the
Yeah.
building still there?
No, no, but I can take you to the spot. So,
Okay. Do you have any
yeah.
pictures from the when the building was there?
I'm sure we could come up with pictures before you get here. Without fail, Youngstown Vindicator. I mean, there are archives. There's the History Museum downtown,
Uh,
right across the street, as a matter of fact. So, Tyler History Center. So, yeah, but Warner Brothers, the brothers were here.
well,
So, yeah, famous place.
that was a long
Just
time ago.
yeah, absolutely. Before my time, before my time.
Say it already. I'm just kidding.
But you but you mentioned the Peter Gabriel. I got to tell you that Jeff Lorber Fusion, Water Sign, I'm 14 years old. The first Yellow Jackets record that you mentioned, I'm 16 years old.
Hmm.
Two albums that really changed my life because I'm a funk drummer. So I was all funk. And those guys, man, oh my goodness. Ricky Lawson on
Yeah.
drums for the Yellow Jackets. God bless him. May he
He was
rest in peace.
my drummer. When I started doing my solo and gigging, he was the guy that I called. He was so wonderful.
Just
He was a good buddy of mine.
wow. Time machine, man.
Seamless drumming.
Definitely.
Or on
Definitely.
show, there's never a spot where you're like, "What was that?" I mean, it's
Right.
just like so perfect.
Did you see the DVD with him playing drums with Steely Dan? I'm trying to think, was it Two Against Nature? But Ricky was the drummer on that. It's fantastic. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
all of the great drummers that Donald Fagen and Walter Becker had used over time, but he had a lock. You could tell a Ricky Lawson lock, man.
oh yeah, man. And
Yeah.
the Classic of Doom. Yeah, I recorded a lot at his studio as well. He's about 30 minutes from me,
Mm,
and put together a little studio, and I did a bunch of records over there. Yeah,
wow.
he was so funny, man. He always carried a chamois around with him, and he would wash cars like just as a friend. And
Mm.
the studio is set up. I have a window that goes into my carport where my car is parked, and I'd be just working away in the studio, and I look up. There's Ricky washing my car. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He goes, man, Paulie, you got to keep this thing clean, man. He'd come in and out. He was such a sweet guy.
Absolutely, absolutely fantastic, man. Well, I have one more question for you, and I would ask about again being entrepreneurial and musician is what this podcast is all about. And I read a lot of music business books, but I've never seen one on the business of music production. Have you ever considered the business aspect of being a producer and what that means and perhaps
Uh,
notating it?
yeah, I thought about doing stuff, but I don't know. I got you got this one.
No, I don't have the Ballad of Tommy LiPuma. I have to add that to my collection. In fact, last week I had a stack of books just kind of sitting and showing what has influenced me both in the music industry as well as autobiographies. I don't want to run way out there to get them for you. I'll let you know that after the fact. But no, the
Yeah,
Ballad of Tommy LiPuma
but-
from
no,
Cleveland, Ohio, as a matter of fact. You know that, right?
I thought it was Cleveland.
Cleveland, that's what I said. Yeah,
Oh,
Cleveland, Ohio. Yeah, Cleveland is right down the street from us, an hour and 15 minutes away.
honest, and a radio promoter guy. That's before he started producing, you know.
Yeah.
And he was always one of my favorites, you
Yeah.
know. And I got a chance. He flew me to New York. It's funny because at Amigo Studios, so Al Schmidt's producing, and engineering. Tommy's producing, and I think it was probably um, the first Yellow Jackets record,
Mm-hmm.
BENSON record that
Yeah.
I assisted on, right? So all these years later, Tommy flies me to New York and he's trying to sign me as an independent producer. When I already had my deal with Warner Brothers, and he was trying to pull me away from Warner Brothers. So he flies me first class, boom. I walk into his office and he looks at me and he said, "Oh, that Paul Brown. You were sitting in the back of the frickin' room while we're doing those records and never said a word. Now I get it," you know. He didn't put the two and two together at all.
My goodness.
And he said, "Hey, man, I love your, the sound of your stuff has a vibe, and it's unquestionably your vibe." And he goes, "I love it. I want you to work for me." And he actually offered me his job later. But at that time, he goes, "I want you to start working. His first record I want you to do is George Benson. And I want you to go have lunch with him right now," which I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's interesting as a producer, when someone comes to you, you can imagine, okay, if he came to you and said, "Okay, I want you to produce George Benson." Okay, here's a guy who can play anything, sing anything. And so, okay, it's up to you. You pick the songs, you do what you want to do. What do you do? That's a lot of pressure with an artist like that. It's not like a new guy who's like, "Okay, well, let's try this, let's try this." This is somebody who's, legendary.
Absolutely.
And it's an interesting thing to be put in that position. And it's inspiring and it's challenging, but luckily, we got along and we picked some stuff and it was incredible.
Mm-hmm. Love him. I love Tommy LiPuma, man. I love his productions. I think my favorite of his is what he did with Shaka's "What You Gonna Do For Me" album. It was just like, come on.
Well,
It's crazy.
that, he was so versatile because he could work with, George, but then he could also work with Barbra Streisand
Right.
and, many different people, Elvis Costello and Gabor Szabo and, all these cats, Al Jarreau, David Sanborn.
Right.
In fact, David Sanborn's best album, Pearls, by far. Tommy LiPuma. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And he was going to produce my record, The City, which came up, they were the ones that signed me to do
really?
my first, a GRP, him and Ron Goldstein. But it was Tommy who really wanted to sign me as an artist because, at the time I was still working for Warner Brothers, but they weren't that interested in signing me as a solo artist. They were, but not. Tommy was like, "Yeah, let's do this. This is great." And he was set to produce my second record that I did with GRP, The City. And I don't know if you remember, but he produced Mark Allman, which was one of my all-time favorite records as well. It was like 17 minutes long.
Right.
It had an amazing vocal, but it had a guitar solo, nylon string solo, piano solo, Rhodes solo, flute solo.
Yeah.
And then it went into this double time 12-string thing at the end. It was just like, I think it was the precursor to smooth jazz, that album. It was probably when I was about 16 or 17 years old when it came out. So like 72 or 71, something like that.
Right. Right.
Great album.
Yeah.
Anyway, I decided I wanted to do the song The City. And Tommy was going to produce it, but it never worked out, but timing-wise. But he was the inspiration behind me doing that album and doing that song, The City. And I did a vocal version and a bonus cut instrumental version.
My goodness gracious. Wow. Well, see, you continue to push me forward, man. And this will be the last question. I don't want to dictate your time. I appreciate you, but any advice to a new producer, musician who's coming up, who's standing at the threshold, and you're at the far end going, wow, we have all of these journeys and experiences. Here's the two things, kid, that you have to know. What would they be?
I mean, at this point, I think it's really important to do everything. You know, you can't just do one thing. I mean, if I was just a guitar player, I don't think I would have this lifestyle and, you know, successes and whatevers. It would be a different life, that's for sure. But you got to learn, do some mixing, okay? Because when you mix, it affects everything you do when you start a song. You know, you're like, okay, here's the drum part, here's the Rhodes, here's, you know, but it has to sound a certain way because I know when I get to the mix, this is what I want, you
Yeah,
know, and don't just pile stuff on. I mean, you can do that and then mute later, but having a mixing experience, you know, helps everything along the way.
mm-hmm.
And, um, and you have to write, you know, you have to write and you have to arrange and you have to engineer, you have to do everything. You have
Yeah,
to have all those musical and money streams, you know, otherwise it's very hard to make it.
sure.
And I'm doing a project right now called BPM, you know, beats per minute, but it's
Hmm.
Braun, Homburg, me, and Michael Paulo. And I did it. I was doing a concert with Bromberg and Paulo down in Mexico. And I really enjoyed his melodic sense, and his soloing is just phenomenal. So I talked to him about putting a band together, like a four-play band.
Right, right.
And so it ended up being the three of us. And then we have different guests on keys. We have Philippe Sace on a couple songs. We have um, Tom Schulman on a couple songs. And Tony Moore played the drums.
Mm.
But it's very challenging, you know, musically and personally,
Yeah,
because doing something with a band is a completely different experience than doing it on your own, you know.
right.
And this is another good experience, you know, just to round out your whole, you know, vibe. So, I mean, I also have a blues band,
Mm.
Brothers Brown. There's another Paul Brown who lives in Nashville and plays keys.
Wow.
We thought, okay, let's put a band together, two Paul Browns, Brothers Brown. And the other guys are in Nashville as well. And we just put out our second record a few months ago
Mm.
called Nowhere Left to Go. And that's also a really interesting project to me because that's the music I grew up playing and listening to as a kid. Like I told you, I didn't get into jazz until I was, you know, well into my late 20s.
Yeah.
So, you know, my whole teens, I was playing, you know, I was an Eric Clapton, Jerry Garcia fan, Deadhead, all the way. So, you know, it's interesting. And I listen to Wes Montgomery too,
Yeah.
but you know, I really listen to Jerry Garcia a lot more. And so I love that stuff.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Completely well-rounded and really speaks to your, first of all, your love for music, your commitment to it, and why you're so great at producing it, man. It's been my honor to have you on this platform. Can't wait till we can shake hands in a couple of weeks, you know, but blessings to you and thank you for your contribution to this great thing that we like to call music, especially jazz music. Dude, you've done it.
Let me give you an example.
You sure?
So here's the key of E, all right?
Hmm.
Most people play, right?
Right?
Now, Jerry Garcia, Mixolydian in E.
Uh-huh. Mm.
But it's jazz. It's jazz over folk rock music. I mean, all the way. You know, they intermingle, and if you can, you know, figure it out and make it part of your vocabulary, that's kind of what works for me.
Hmm.
So that's,
Definitely.
if you're a musician, you know, you gotta check out what people are doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it, you know, and somehow I use a lot of that in my music and
Right.
soloing for sure, you know, and you know, if I listen to Coltrane or I've listened to, say, Grant Green.
Yeah.
He doesn't
Yeah.
sound like a guitar player to me. He sounds like a sax player or a trumpet player, and he always sounds like he's going to fall off the cliff any second. But somehow it just is magical.
Hmm.
but it's not based around guitar licks at
Sure.
all. It's just a musical thing. And
Mhm.
that's really cool. And I hate when people play scales, that just makes no sense to me. So,
Good point.
people can practice scales, but if you
Why
can't
play them?
a way that makes sense, it's just not that musical. Of course, those are the notes, but not played in that sequence. You know?
You're talking like a drummer though right now.
Well,
Okay. That's
it all comes back to that. Like my dad used to always say, uh, a bad note played at the right time is a lot better than a good note played at the wrong time.
very cool.
So,
Very cool.
but let's face it, they both suck. My dad used to always tell me though, talent skips a generation. And he was
Is that what
serious.
he said? Is that what he said? Talent skips, huh?
I said, well, okay. He was a genius. I'll give him that.
Well, I tell you what, man, you have been a genius. Listen, I say this all the time, man. My nose is brown enough. I don't have to say anything that I don't mean. But as far as your contribution is concerned, it's been genius in the way that it's been crafted, in the blessings of being able to work with the people. But there's the opportunity to work with them and then to do what you have done and take those songs to number one. That's genius to me.
Thank you. I mean, I think one thing I'm most proud of is the longevity of repeat customers. Like with Boney, I did 9 records. I've done 8 with Peter White and 8 with Euge Groove, and about 6 or 7 with Norman Brown, and so that shows 5 or 6 with Jesse J, and on and on and on. So it adds up, but it's a nice thing to have people come back to you and say, hey, okay, let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Absolutely. Well, brothers and sisters, friends and strangers, this is two-time Grammy Award winner, 75, number one,
77.
contemporary jazz radio, 77.
That's right.
77. Let's make that right. 13 albums. Say it again.
There's been things happening since last time we talked.
Thanks. And that means songs going to number one. So that's 77. This is, as Jazz Review calls him, the greatest producer in the history of smooth jazz. For sure, hands down. This is not hype. He's proven it by his track record. Paul Brown, thank you for joining us. My name is Jerry B. I am the entree musician. And as I always say, so are you. We will see you again next time.
Hope to see you guys soon.